Refugees. That word probably brings a lot of different images to our minds. Part of it's probably influenced by the media and the political scene and the talk shows and everything, but what does it truly mean? Who are refugees? At the Center for New Americans, part of Lutheran Social Service, we are the official affiliate of the federal government to do the resettlement here in South Dakota. So I'm going to explain the realities of refugees and resettlement and explain what it is and hopefully show you what it's not. So starting at the beginning, who are refugees? Well, it's a very specific definition, actually, and it differs from an immigrant. An immigrant's just an individual who chooses to move to a new country, whereas a refugee is someone who has faced persecution due to their race, their religion, their nationality, or even membership in a political or social organization, have been forced to flee their country. They cannot return. That choice is taken away from them. Resettlement has been a last option for them to even gain a life. But let's dig deeper. Who are refugees besides this definition? Well, honestly, they could be you or me, the person next to you, your parents, your cousins. Refugee status knows no boundaries of political or economic or social. It could affect anyone, and it does affect anyone. But to put it in some more terms, refugees are individuals who are forced to flee their home at a moment's notice, oftentimes with just the clothes that they wear and have on them. They're individuals who are forced to survive on the run, sometimes spending not just months, but years out of a permanent home. There's someone who has had to say goodbye to someone that they love, whether it's a family or whether it's a loved one or just a friend or someone they see on a regular basis. And there's someone who has had to start over from nothing, had to learn a whole new language, a new culture, a new economic system, new types of jobs. What would you do if this was your 5-year-old and that the only option you had for his safety was to spend your life savings and put him on a small boat to cross the Mediterranean Sea, where he has a high likelihood of sinking and killing him? What would you do if you had to pack up everything and walk months to find safety? If you had many children to try and feed, but no option to work? And how would you deal with the psychological trauma of growing up or spending decades in war-torn areas of the world? To put some numbers on it, by the end of 2016, the UN, the United Nations, estimated that there are 22.5 million individuals who are refugees. On top of that, you have another 41.3 million displaced people. So those are individuals who don't qualify as a refugee. They don't fit that definition. They may still be in their home country, or they're displaced for other reasons. So in reality, the number we're actually talking about is 65.5 million people. And that number is astoundingly hard to wrap our brain around, especially coming from here in South Dakota, where we have barely 1 million people in the entire state. So breaking it down further, imagine that's about 20 people every single minute. Basically, a classroom size worth of people are gone in 1 minute. 51% of refugees are under the age of 18. They are children who have to make these insanely hard decisions on where do I go, how do I get help, and how do I survive. 55% of refugees are actually just from one of 3 countries. 11 million people are either from Afghanistan, South Sudan, or Syria right now. That's how horrific these conflicts are in those areas. And yet we barely hear anything in the news about South Sudan. We probably don't even talk about the refugees from Afghanistan. We might talk about the war and the political situation, but not the refugees and the people themselves. Most refugees are hosted in developing regions of the world. The top 6 hosting countries are right here. Places like Turkey, Pakistan, Lebanon, Iran, Uganda, Ethiopia. 1/4 of Jordan's citizens, or a population, are refugees. 1/4 of its country is refugees, to give you some idea of how big this is. So where are refugees coming from? If they're hosted in these countries, where are they coming from to end up in these places? Well, here in South Dakota, we do see some Middle Eastern refugees. We see a few refugees from Iraq and Afghanistan every single year. Most of these are military refugees, individuals who help the United States Army as an interpreter or an informant or even a medic. This is a camp in Jordan, in a place where, like I said, 1/4 of their population are refugees. This one camp alone has 140,000 individuals. I come from Sioux Falls. That is basically the population of Sioux Falls right now, and the size of Sioux Falls, yet these aren't cities. Out of Southeast Asia, and yes, there are refugees from Southeast Asia, individuals from Bhutan and from Burma who were forced out of their country back in the late 80s and early 90s, who stayed in refugee camps for 25 years before being resettled, are finally coming here. This is a little bit more up-close picture of a refugee camp. You can see it's not paved streets, living in bamboo huts. Many of them don't have shoes, and we'll get into why that's the case. And finally, out of Africa, refugees from Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, South Sudan, and a small country that no one has ever heard of but Eritrea. These are where refugees are coming from and arriving right now. This last aerial shot is another refugee camp. This one is in Kenya. It's called Dadaab, and it's the world's largest refugee camp. It's been a permanent spot in Kenya since 1991, which is ironic because refugee camps, in its concept, is supposed to be a temporary solution, but to be around for 28 years. At its height, it had 400,000 individuals living in this camp. It's down from that, but only to 350,000 individuals. So these are massively huge camps. I don't know a better way to describe it than rough conditions, but when you talk with refugees about the refugee camp and their home, and they get this interesting look in their eye, and it's all the same, no matter who I talk to. They don't want to, they can't even really share everything about the camp life, but there are very, very few resources for food, for health care, for education, for work. Individuals basically are placed in there and sit and wait. I've talked with kids who have fallen from trees and broken their arms because they were trying to get the leaves off the trees to cook because there was not enough food. The two most depressing things about refugee camps are probably these statistics right here. 75% of refugees remain in camps for over 5 years. And if you break it down further, if you're not out of a refugee situation within that first 5 years, your average suddenly jumps up to 20 years in a camp. We're here on campus where many of us are in our 20s or late teens. Imagine being born in a refugee camp, your entire life spent in a place where there's not enough. Places where you have to stand in water lines in order to get fresh water, to wait in long lines for supplies, for shoes, for cups, for utensils, for cooking supplies, for not having enough food. 32% of refugees are chronically malnourished. They are not getting the proper nutrients. Different types of shelter that they might have. Cooking on open fire. As I mentioned, dealing with that psychological trauma. The Syrian war has been going on for 7 years, and children have been being born this entire time. How can they process things when all they know are bombs falling, all they know are people dying, and their loved ones missing? Getting the right type of school when they don't have enough supplies, which sometimes means sitting outside with a chalkboard and a teacher trying to learn. So this has led us up to why resettlement is a needed thing. And I said I'd tell you what resettlement is. Resettlement is a careful selection by governments around the world, like the US, for purposes of lawful admission of vulnerable refugees who cannot return to their home country and cannot safely live in neighboring countries. And right now, about 37 countries participate in this program. And as you can see up there, 189,300 individuals were resettled through the selection process. 189,000. That is a very small fraction. The United Nations has identified that 8% of refugees, that 22 million, about 1.5 million of them, are in dire need of resettlement, and yet less than 1% actually are able to be resettled and go through. For the United States, we have a long history of taking in the stranger and welcoming them. It started from our inception. The Pilgrims, who were they? The first refugees. We've had highs of 200,000 individuals in any given fiscal year to lows of 27,000. This year, the presidential determination, we're on track to resettle about 45,000 individuals, which is actually a low compared to the last 16 years of 85,000 individuals. But understanding the process itself, for the United States, this is the hardest process to go through in order to enter the United States. It involves 8 different federal agencies, 6 different security databases, 5 different background checks, 4 biometrics checks, 3 in-person interviews, and 2 interagency checks. If there's any doubt about this individual, they are not going to be admitted. And so I have a handy-dandy flow graphic that we can walk through the steps as if you were a refugee. The first step is you don't get a choice of resettlement. If you're one of the 8% that they've identified and refer on the United Nations, lucky you, you get that referral. And you might be referred to the United States, you might be referred to Canada, or Australia, or somewhere in Europe, or South America. You don't get a choice of countries if you're one who's being referred. If you're referred to the United States, here's where those 8 federal agencies take over. The FBI, Homeland Security, State Department, Department of Defense, the National Counterterrorism and Intelligence Communities are all processing your information. And they're looking for any reason why you could pose a threat to the United States and its security. If you're one of the few who make it through this process, great. Now we got those biometrics and those background checks. And you get that in-person interview to tell your story and make sure that your story, as you tell it, matches up to what the reality of those background checks have found out. If you pass this stage as well, then it's a conditional approval. You still have to go for medical screenings, and if those medical screenings deem that you might be a threat to public health, then I'm sorry, the process is over for you, and you'll go back to that refugee camp. If not, the next stage is you get to learn about the United States before you come, so you're prepared. And this is actually where a location is chosen for them. Remember how I said they don't get to choose the country? They also don't get to choose the state and the city that you're resettled to. About 70% of arrivals to the United States have a family connection. It's a family reunification program, basically. And that stat holds true for South Dakota as well. So if you're approved and assigned to South Dakota, most likely it's because you have a parent, a child, a sibling, a cousin, someone here that you want to be reunited with. The last piece before they leave is they have to pay for their plane ticket. It's not a free ride. You might think, well, how do they pay for tickets? You just told me many of them haven't worked in decades. Well, they go through a loan process with the federal government. The U.S. grants them a loan to cover the cost of that plane ticket, but they do have to repay that loan. And they have to start repaying that loan within about 4 to 6 months after arrival. So it's not like they just put it off, it's right away. And from there, this is where they get integrated and welcomed and become self-sufficient. And this is what Lutheran Social Services does. The federal government gives refugees 90 days of assistance to become self-sufficient. 3 months to learn English, to learn job skills, to learn the community, and be able to support themselves. which is nearly impossible. I have met 2 individuals who found a job before 3 months. So through a private-public partnership, like Lutheran Social Services, being a nonprofit, we are able to extend that time to up to 8 months. And so we go through more orientation. Yes, they got it overseas, but we're teaching South Dakota and Sioux Falls specific. So doctors, teachers, lawyers, bankers, police officers, even individuals from the Department of Labor and Department of Social Services come in and talk about different services and different realities of being here in the United States, of what is a job? What are jobs that refugees are eligible for? What are education opportunities available to you? They also get a team of caseworkers, individuals who, like myself, help find housing for them and teach them all about housing. Individuals who walk them through the stages of the medical field, going to doctors, learning about the pharmacy, how to get to the doctor appointments, how to make appointments. Individuals who help them walk through the stages of employment, and even individuals who walk them through the stages of eligibility for some public benefits for those up to 8 months from the federal government. And so all of this is available to refugees as they come. But being as we're also a private nonprofit organization, we are also able to add additional services. And these are open to anyone in the community who needs them. You don't have to hold refugee status. You could be a United States citizen and get these. So if you need education services like English as a second language, or job training classes, or even citizenship prep classes for those who are ready to become a naturalized citizen and have to take that test, we offer free classes for them for as long as they need. We also have immigration staff, lawyers who help them walk through the stages of getting their green card or their permanent residency, getting their citizenship, starting and initiating the family reunification process. I've met many parents who had to leave children behind, who had to leave their spouse behind, and would like them here, and walking through all the different applications and the different fees associated with that, as well as even just getting travel documents in order to travel to other countries before you get your US passport being a citizen. And finally, we also offer interpreters. And these interpreters go out into the community, at doctors' offices, parent-teacher conferences, court appointments, any sort of place and time that an organization would need an interpreter to give their services to the community. We are there and able to help. We have about 35 different languages and dialects through our interpreters and are always looking for more. And so I share all of this with you as we talk about diversity here in South Dakota. We have huge diversity here. We have lots of newcomers who are coming in. And it is now time that you could do something. And the easiest thing you can do is welcome them. Be a welcoming face to explain something, to say hi, to show them that this is a land of opportunity, and what they see and heard in stories is true, that you can make anything of yourself. So I want to thank you for listening to me today.